Welcome to the show. Nick Suss of The Tennessean, covering the Tennessee Titans here on Lamestream Sports, brought to you, of course, by our great friends over at 8th and Roast. You can find their beans at a grocery store near you, and, of course, 4 great locations across the city: West End, Charlotte Avenue, 8th Avenue, and the airport. Nick, how are you, sir? Good to have you. What's going on?
I am here. I am back. As I think I told you guys beforehand, I have gotten one piece of feedback on our previous show, which is one more feedback than I've ever gotten anywhere. So glad to be back. Let's hope I can make it 2 people I know who hear this show.
I don't feel great about that, Nick.
I don't know that many people fundamentally. So let's not cast aspersions on you guys based on my friend group.
We're gonna chalk it up to the problem being you.
Please do.
Do you think that most people who can tell you every single guest host on Saturday Night Live for 30 years have a lot of friends?
I know the community is vibrant. I have gotten multiple text messages today about the trailer for SNL 1975. People know my brand. But beyond that, no, probably not that many friends.
All right. Well, you're an excellent reporter, though, so we'll talk about that.
Thank you.
Okay, so first and foremost, last time we talked to you, Nick, it was about a year ago. Literally, I think the first couple of weeks of August. We were a couple of weeks away from the start of the Titans season getting going, and Mike Vrabel was the head coach. Now Brian Callahan is the head coach. So just sort of for fans out there and for yourself, can you explain some of the structural differences that Brian Callahan has put in place in terms of the coverage of the team, the access to the team, and how that's different from the Mike Vrabel era?
Yeah, short story long probably here, but player access is a little bit different. Under the Vrabel era, it was players coming off the field during training camp every day. In the Callahan era, there's a lot more podium stuff and a lot more scrum stuff. If Callahan is talking in a day, then all the players are pre-selected by the team. If it's a day that Callahan's not talking, then you can just grab players at your own leisure. So it's been a 50-50 split this camp. There have been some fireside chats that are conversations on the record, but with no video recording, whether that's phones or cameras, which have been interesting because it's a little bit looser of a setting. I think everybody's a little more loosened up when there's not a camera in their face. So answers have been a little bit different, a little bit more big picture in those settings. And beyond that, Callahan will go ahead.
Are you saying that the TV questions don't necessarily make for as good a press conference?
I am not saying the TV people aren't there. They're asking questions. They're there.
Oh, they are there.
It's just not
the cameras aren't there. Okay.
Yeah, it's just the formatting of the questions lead to a little more in-depth analysis just based on the fact that we're not trying to get a 34-second soundbite for Twitter or whatever. But yeah, there's a little more injury reporting at the top. Callahan's a little more forthcoming about minor nicks and bruises there. Other than that, football's football. Practice is practice. They haven't reinvented 7-on-7 and called it 6-on-6 or anything like that. They are still practicing football. But from a media access perspective, yeah, the little tweaks do make it interesting. There were some times during OTAs where it was difficult to differentiate on-site coverage when you were talking to 4 people in a day and there are 15 media members, 20 media members all trying to talk to the same 4 people. But that issue kind of resolves itself during training camp when there's so much to chase and so much to write about. And hopefully the people who are the most invested in covering this beat go off platform a little bit and try and tell some stories in different ways.
Well, and that doesn't, to your point, like these minor changes certainly make it a little bit easier. I think the fireside chat is far more conversational for not just the coach, but also the reporters as well, which is going to make for better questions, I think. And certainly like allowing fans at practice for most of every open practice, it does sort of take the teeth away from all of the wonderful tweets we get from Titans camp, but it does mean that there's not as much pressure. You can kind of just throw stuff out there, see as you see fit. It's not that much different for the reporters, for those of us who are there, but it is better for the fans, right?
I think so. I think that the information is a little more free flowing. Whether that is good for the fan, I will leave that up to the individual fan of if they want to know the nitty gritty of who's taken the number 7 inside linebacker reps on a certain day. I think that we can go information overload during training camp season, and I have to really engineer my brain to realize most readers probably care about 7 players right now. And that's not denigration in any way. Like, you reasonably should, if you're a football fan, care about 7 to 10 players on your team on August 8th. And to get into the nitty gritty of, oh, was that Gabe Giudicelli or Robert Javier who was taking that cornerback rep there? It's important from a factual perspective, and I do like spreading fact, but from a newspaper of record perspective, I don't necessarily know if all of this excess information is necessarily that beneficial beyond the dopamine hit we get from seeing a tweet have likes.
That's 7 players, not 7 deep at a position.
Yes, yeah.
Who are the 7 players, Nick?
Oh gosh, if I had to give you my priorities right now, I've got a whiteboard somewhere at home. People care about Will Levis. People care about DeAndre Hopkins and Calvin Ridley. I think people care about Devondre Sweat. He has probably crept up into that 4th spot. I think there is probably an argument to be made for L'Jarius Sneed being at 5. Tony Pollard probably gets my pick for number 6. And, oh gosh, I arrived at 7 as a number. Let's try and fit a 7.
Well, you have not said the one guy who gets into fights with local media. You haven't said that guy yet.
Let's call it Jeffrey Simmons. That is a fair person to put in that spot.
I think there's more. I think there's a few more, and I will not stand for this Gabe Giudicelli slander any longer on the program. We'll have to defend the University of Tennessee alumni on the show. So Callahan's strategy around communication, it's clear that it's very different than Vrabel. I don't know where I fall on the, it's a different era of NFL football, and you can't be this certain type of old school coach. I think Vrabel gets absolutely unfairly labeled as like this meathead old school communicator, but Brian has absolutely had a different approach with the press from the beginning. Is that naivete, or is that savvy, or is it just who he is?
I think it's probably who he is. We have to get to know him better as he spends more time in Nashville, obviously, but my talks with him in press conferences and one-on-one, he seems genuine. He seems sincere. He seems like somebody who is going to address people the way he addresses people. And I think the dead giveaway is that his dad addresses people the same way. That might just be familial. That might be learned, because in talking with Bill Callahan, their speaking strategies aren't that dissimilar. I think that directness works. Like we're sitting here on August 8th. Wow, he told us that Garrett Wallow has a torn pectoral muscle. If it was October 8th, we'd know that because there's an injury report. Like, this is information that the NFL requires to be made public at a certain point, and holding it back doesn't benefit you. And if you don't tell somebody on a Monday and have to tell them on a Wednesday, there's really nothing that you're competitive gaining except, oh, they have 18 hours less or 36 hours less to game plan against this player that they probably already knew was hurt because they watched the game and saw he was hurt. So I don't know. I think that it's good when people are forthcoming. I think that people appreciate honesty, but I don't think that this is some giant indictment on the Vrabel era, like you're saying. I think there was some unfair malignment there, because being gruff doesn't mean you aren't forthcoming. Like, he told his honest version of the truth a lot. So I don't know. I'm not going to say that one is a huge upgrade over the other.
There were some criticisms last year of the front office being a little opaque kind of during the Vrabel era. And I'm interested in you now, a year later on the beat, and sort of with a different coaching staff that's been installed by this front office. Like, where is the front office in terms of its opaqueness or kind of accessibility? Is it good, bad, or indifferent? Do you find them to be open or helpful or not helpful, or how are they?
I can't say I've sensed too much of a change. I think the philosophy last year and the philosophy this year was, the second training camp starts, the coach is the mouthpiece of the team. I think that the front office was a little bit more open during free agency and during the draft season this year than they were in year one. And that might have been working through some growing pains of figuring out how much you want to be the face or not the face of something. But I don't know. I think that opaque is a strong word. I'm not saying it's correct or incorrect, but I think that matters of opinion here, when it comes to what should and shouldn't a front office be accountable for saying. I think that in a perfect world, anyone who has power would always talk about their power and talk through their process of power. But I think that when you have gradients of power and it's unclear exactly who is the person doing everything and how much one person wants to take credit or wants to deflect credit, you get into a situation of people who are just comfortable with different levels of accountability. And I am not saying people should not be held accountable beyond their comfort levels, but I am saying it's understandable that people have to figure out their own comfort levels.
Do you think that there is clarity along those lines in terms of the team and those lines of communication and those lines of who's making decisions now versus a year ago?
Yeah, I think there's clarity in the sense that they told us something. Like, nobody's ever going to see inside the room and get to say, oh, yes, they signed Quandre Diggs specifically because Chad Brinker liked him. Like, we're not going to see that process. We're going to have the process told to us from there. But from what they're telling us, there is more clarity on a strategy than what we'd had previously.
In which case, because it's 2024, and it is very likely that the leader of the free world will be decided completely on vibes in November. All of the training camp has been about vibes. I've heard this from people inside the organization. We've heard it from media. We've heard it from everybody around the building. The vibes are different. It's vibes. How does one report on vibes? How do you go about taking what you hear, being in the environment yourself, observing, and then figuring out what's real and what's everyone's coming from a different perspective, right? That there's certainly people have agendas of their own at all times. So how do you, I don't know, maybe the right question is just how do you report on vibes? How do you know what's real?
I think that this camp has been a clinic in the value of specificity. It's like what we're seeing is vibe based. You're right. But there is a difference between saying, hey, people seem looser, and saying, man, did you see that Nicholas Petit-Frere press conference? Like, the guy looked like he had a 50-pound weight taken off his back. Like, him specifically, you can say, oh, he seems happier. And you can talk about, like, today, I can't remember if you and I were standing next to each other. We might have separated at this point, but the hit that Kenneth Murray made on Tony Pollard on the pass rush today. And like I wrote something about this. You guys can find it if you care. Like just that thud and watching the entire sideline react and erupt as a, oh my, that is a statement. Like that is a vibe that you can report on because you see this happen and you think, oh, that's different. Linebacker coming downhill and laying a lick on a running back in pass protection and everybody erupting in joy. Or Nick Holtz this morning having some choice words for his quarterbacks and receivers not being able to connect against air, or me not being able to tweet a single video of the outside linebackers all camp because Ben Bloom will not relent on his choice words, if I want to repeat myself. Things like that, you can very specifically tell, oh, this is new. This is very unique in that there is a new attitude permeating from the program. Now, if I were to just say, oh, the vibes are good, like, who cares? It's training camp. The vibes are good everywhere. Everybody thinks they can win the Super Bowl. I have a joke when I get into the office here at the Tennessean every day where I walk up to a reporter and I say, they're still undefeated. Because it's training camp. They're still undefeated. Who cares? But you look at some of these things like yesterday, the play that you and I were standing together for, where Levis goes deep and hits Ridley, but Sweat had gotten his face and Skoronski had to anchor. And like the fact that I can signify these moments. Last year, if you asked me what was working at training camp, I would have been like, I bet Derek's going to run well. Like it seems like a more specific training camp, if that makes sense.
Okay. Along those lines, the thing that people are the most consumed with is Levis.
Yeah.
And is he a key to the, I mean, he is the key to if they have a successful season, but how do you, when you're watching him and you're trying to report out, okay, here's Will Levis before the season starts, what are you looking at? And what can you glean from talking to other coaches and players about what they see about Levis here in year two?
I am unfortunately going to be deliberately vague here to not give away things that will be reported on later. So I am sorry about that.
That's right.
But I think that you have to differentiate Will the on-field presence from Will the off-field presence, because in one sense, you are looking at a player who is very clearly establishing himself as a leader amongst a team. And in another sense, you have a player who is very clearly establishing himself as a face of a franchise without a face. And those are things that can work in concert, but also kind of have to work separately. Because if you're the face of the team, you are on the pedestal. And if you are the leader of the team, you are pushing everybody forward. So I think that when you're talking about that former, when you're talking about him being the leader of the team, you can definitely see people are responding to the way that Will goes about his preparation. I think that there is a lot of documented evidence of players talking about, well, I liked the way Will did this in the meeting room or said that in the film room. I think there are examples like today of Peter Skoronsky talking about, man, Will was good in the huddle last year, but he commands a huddle completely differently this year in year two. You have stories like yesterday, I asked Will something pretty minor about like learning how to deal with pressure in practice when you know the guy's not going to hit you anyway. And he gives this really eloquent answer about, well, how do I prepare for a screen pass when the guys are deliberately easing off not to hit me, but I need them to rush me to lull them in, but I can't lull them in if I tell them, hey, it's a screen pass, because then they're going to lull back. So what do I do here? And like that savvy of forethought, I think, is really driving the team. I don't want to say analytical, because that's not necessarily true or untrue, but there is a analytical mind to the way that he is leading the team that I think is interesting. Off the field, Levis's presence has been very easy to track this offseason. He has been everywhere. He has been somebody who is trying to get a face out there, both for the Titans and for himself, and get that while you get the opportunity, man. If you can go to the Kentucky Derby and the Masters and kiss a catfish at a Preds game and go to celebrity poker in Vegas and play golf with Phil Mickelson and all this stuff, do that. That's awesome. But it's you see the guy have those opportunities and you understand why, because he's magnetic.
Dating reality TV stars.
Sure.
It is what it is.
As one does.
As well. I mean, he's quarterback in the NFL, like date whoever you want. I'm not going to ask you to give any more away, but I'm curious because you said I thought the faceless comment was interesting about the organization, because I do think from a vocal standpoint, Levis needs to be that part of the offense. I think Denard Wilson is going to be that on the defense. He's has this very similar personality, very fiery, very vocal. Simmons is a guy we've already talked about kind of in passing, but I'm curious if you are trying to write the story of the faces outside of the guy who's the quarterback and actively trying to put himself there. What are the stories? Who are the personalities that this fan base gravitates towards over the course of the next 6 months?
That's an interesting way to phrase it, because I think the distinction would be the fan base gravitating towards versus the national perception of the team. Because I think when you're talking about a face of a team, you kind of do have to look nationally here. And that's where I get into the faceless moniker. Because I still think if we're playing Family Feud and ask 100 people to name a Tennessee Titan, Derrick Henry's the most common answer. And that's unfair to the players on the team, but we also understand the way the Titans are known outside of this market. If we're talking inside the market, just based off of fan engagement at practices and excitement levels when you see people walk into stadiums and to practice and stuff, and based on readership that I see, I think DeAndre is the person that gets gravitated to the next most. I think he is a name brand. He is a potential Hall of Famer. He is somebody who really does have that steadying, calming presence, who's ingratiated himself really well in Nashville. I think you look at the way he's gotten involved with country music and local celebrities and talked about his love for this city and this organization. I think that has endeared him to the fans. Beyond that, I think Jeff has a level of endearment that fans very much enjoy. I think that there are always going to be fascinations with your first round picks. So I think Latham is growing in interest in that regard. I think that you're always going to, my old joke is that the most famous person on every team is going to be the tight end, and the most hated person is always going to be the offensive coordinator. So people are always going to talk about Josh Wiley and Chigakonkwo because football fans are broadly obsessed with tight ends. And that is something that should be remarked upon for a later podcast if you guys want to talk about weird fascinations. But I don't know. I am waiting.
Biggest football podcast in the world is hosted by a tight end.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me that, like, back when I was in college, I noticed this. You can pull every SEC fan base. What is the thing your offensive coordinator should do more? And the answer would always be throw to the tight end. It didn't matter what corner of the conference you were in. The idea was, get it to the tight end more. He's underrated. Every tight end's underrated. Every single tight end is underrated.
This must be why Nick Vannett and Jeffrey Simmons are getting the day off in the first preseason game.
There's some equality there. I don't know. I am interested to see Sweat's trajectory as a marketable household figure with this team, because I do think the interest for Sweat is so high.
Yeah.
I think people are fascinated by somebody that large being that athletic. And if he does come out and wreck some plays like we've seen him do through camp, I think he could shoot really high up the list on the fame factor. But I think that the Titans there is a negativity associated with being a journeyman who isn't associated with one team. And I think that there is the just perception you will see of the Titans of, it's the graveyard. This guy was great somewhere else, and then he played for the Titans. And so when you are somebody who is so associated with a different team, but you are on the Titans now, it's hard to become the face of the Titans. And that is not a knock on L'Jarius Sneed or Calvin Ridley or Lloyd Cushenberry or any of the players who I think are going to be pretty darn good for the Titans this year, but it's going to take a long time for them to be associated as Titans.
What is your thought about the fan base this year and sort of where they are? Because it's been a bad couple of years, but towards the end of the last couple of seasons, it's been really, really nasty. Do you think people are broadly optimistic? Do you think they're not putting expectations on, or they are, or they're where do you gauge kind of fan reaction right now?
Someone asked me this question yesterday, and the word I used was refreshed. Does that sound right for you guys? I think that there's a refreshing quality for 25 years, 23 years, the Titans' identity was, we're the ground and pound. We're going to beat you with hard work and grit and dust and effort. We're going to do things old school. We're going to play football the old way. And with the exception of those two Wisenhunt years, that was the Titans. And the two Wisenhunt years are probably the two worst Titans years. So fundamentally, the Titans are a team that do things a certain way. And that is not a particularly modern way. So you see Callahan come in and you see these new coaches and general managers and front office personnel doing things a more modern way. And I think the response is, that's nice. And it's easy to say, we're catching up. There are 32 teams in the NFL, and I would say 28 teams are behaving in a way very similarly to the Titans, building around quarterback and receivers. And I wrote this the other day. There's 5 commodities that matter in the NFL: pass throwers, pass catchers, pass blockers, pass rushers, and pass defenders. And I think you can fundamentally put every move the Titans made this offseason into one of those 5 buckets. And in the past, those buckets were not necessarily the most valuable things. It's refreshing that the most valuable buckets are in line with the most valuable things in the NFL. But when everybody else is behaving that way, that doesn't mean you're catching up. That means you are doing what is expected. Doing what's expected doesn't mean you're going to win. Doing what's unexpected doesn't mean you're going to lose. They won a lot of games in the Vrabel era doing what was unexpected. So it's refreshing that there is a more modern tact, but I don't think that has necessarily boosted expectations of, now we're the Chiefs. Like, I think people realize that this takes time.
I'm curious because there's a lot of things that kind of all would align with trying to predict is not the right word because I think fans want everyone in media to predict things, and that's not really the job. And honestly, it's not really what draws ratings either. It's storytelling and interesting people and interesting angles and interesting ideas. But is there any way in your mind that you can take this modernization, this sort of intelligent investment in the right places, the good vibes that are everywhere, the loose attitudes, the playing style, the leadership? Can you put all of that into some form of, I think this is, again, before wins and losses actually happen? Is there any way to predict, to have all of that help you prognosticate on what's actually going to happen? Or is it just, it's all just noise until the games happen?
It takes me back to my mediocre high school football playing days of every day my coach would say, boys, hard work beats talent when talent don't work hard enough. And then I would look at my wall, which was lined with every hardest worker of the year award you could give somebody. And then I'd look at my playing time, and it wasn't beating talent. I was working harder than everybody else, but I wasn't the star of the team. I was not starting on the team. So what's really the value of hard work? And that's not to diminish anybody, but this is a results business. We can talk about vibes. We can talk about all this joy and modernization and relief and underscore it however we want. Do the Titans have the best players right now? Out of 32 teams, we can put them anywhere between 21st to 26th right now without seeing them play. I could talk myself into 17th if I'm being overly optimistic. And then maybe they'll play and they'll go out and win 10 games and I'll be dead wrong. But based on what we know right now, there is a reason to think that things are trending up, but that doesn't necessarily mean that up is all the way up. Did that answer what you asked at all?
Yeah, I mean, again, I am fascinated with why things work, and in particular, at high levels of sports, it is almost the talent differentiation between two goaltenders in the NHL, two quarterbacks in the NFL, right. The talent differential is minuscule. It is microscopic. Yeah. It is about emotion. It's about leadership. It's about culture. It's about buy-in. It's about all the other human stuff. And it feels like there's a lot of human stuff that has changed about this franchise. It's vibes, it's energy, it's joy, it's lightness, it's airiness, it's modernization, it's technology, it's analytics. And in theory, that should all translate to success because that's the stuff that separates the two great players who are equal of athletic ability, but it still doesn't give us any insight into whether or not it's going to work or not. And I'm trying to figure out how we find that out outside of, again, waiting for the games to happen.
I would think that if there is any trend line you can look at to try and predict, do vibes lead to success, it would have been found by now.
Yeah.
I am not going to toot the horn that I was screaming about in 2013 when I would wear my momentum doesn't exist shirt that I'm making up that I never actually had. I'm not that hardliner anymore. I do believe in the value of continuity and camaraderie and all this stuff. It is important, but look, the game is going to be decided by a luck of an oblong bounce. We are overthinking something that we love because it's really fun to love things.
Let me ask you about kind of allocation of time in a team that's kind of been blown up. One of the most fun things is to look at the players on the margins. I mean, HBO has built a franchise around the guys that get cut, essentially in Hard Knocks. How much can you focus on some of these marginal stories, which may be really interesting, versus all of the change that's happened kind of within the team? I mean, the offensive line is is revamped. It's a fairly new receiving room. Levis is only in his second year. The defense, everything behind the linebackers is seemingly changed. Where do you kind of put your time when you've got a lot of stories to tell already?
Yeah, I think that if we're drawing the line between observation and writing, the difference between reporting and writing, I am not going to take too much time talking about the 83rd guy on a roster, unfortunately. There are a lot of cool stories to be told, and I think there is certainly a platform for telling those stories, but there are limited hours in the day, and we are in an audience business a lot of the time. And so audience does have to matter. And we go back to that rule of 7 I was talking about at the top of, if people care about seeing what Will Levis did every day, I'm going to tell them what Will Levis did every day. And if that takes me a half hour, that's a half hour I can't spend talking about Jabari Small, unfortunately. I do think that there's a huge appetite for knowing who's going to get cut and who's going to make the roster. So I do think that I've probably written 4 projected rosters, and every week I do a winners and losers, and every week I try and format this in digestible ways that people are going to find and want to engage with, because I do think that there is an audience for, well, is this guy going to make the team? Is Thomas Odukoya finally getting over the hump this year? You're right that I've written about this. I've tried to find ways to do that, but look, if we're putting a headline about, I'll leave names out of this here, but if we're putting a headline about undrafted rookie X wants to make the team, well, yeah, he does. He's there. Everybody on the team wants to make the team. Like, these are compelling stories, but I don't have the sound design budget that HBO does to make people cry about it. Like, I have words to tell the story.
It would be pretty awesome to read a headline. It's like, Arden Key doesn't want to make team.
Yeah.
Sources.
I'll keep that joke to myself. Yeah. Not about Arden Key, actually, but go on.
No. So I'll let you go on this, because I'm going to make some broad generalizations just in general, which is that NFL football is the biggest, baddest sports interest that drives the biggest audience, even in a town with Predators hockey and soccer and SEC football and country music and rock and roll and everything else. It is still, NFL football is still the giant and the king. But at an organization like yours, you still have to have these other rules of engagement in mind when it comes to, like you said, the headline there. So are you starting to see some of the matchup there with interest in the sport, meaning how much content fans are consuming? Is that because it's a new, refreshed thing? Is that because there's a change in the market, or is it change in technique and how you guys attract audience? Are you starting to see those things line up, in your opinion?
To get way too macro about this, I think we are at a point in sports coverage where people have so many specialized options that it is tougher and tougher to hit a broad audience about any topic. And I think that continues to be the struggle of, are people more willing to pay a little bit of money to have all of the information, or pay a little bit of money to have specialized information? Do people, if we're talking specifically about the Titans, want to know the in-depth analysis of the linebacker battle, or do they want to hear that Tajay Spears had a good day? There are disparate opinions about all of it, and I think that makes it really tricky to approach things from I am writing for the Titans fan, because the Titans fan isn't a monolith every day. You guys weren't going to get through this without me talking about sitcoms, but it's the difference between making a show for NBC Must-See TV in 1993 and making a show for Hulu today. The rate of success is diminish your audience so you could have a more passionate audience share. Instead of trying to write for everybody, write for the people who are going to return and return and return and come back. And that makes it tricky when you're in a congested audience space like the NFL, when we're out of practice. And what would you estimate? 20 outlets between print and digital and television. There are a lot of people competing for eyes, and that's not counting the people who aren't there who are competing for eyes. So the battle between do you specialize or do you broaden is very, very tough. And in this city with so much specialization, but also so much broad interest, it makes it even tougher. But the optimist in me tells me everybody wants something, and everybody's going to find what they want. And if what somebody wants isn't being done, it will find a way to the surface, because we are greedy little want pigs sometimes. And there's so much content that if the one thing we want isn't there, we got to find it, and it will be found.
Well, it's funny. Sometimes and this is what's happening on YouTube. I've found it happens elsewhere. You can trick people with the broad audience, and then bring them into something that is far deeper and more enriching, because of the way the internet works. At least for now. So, Nick, thank you so much. Make sure everybody you swing by a great location of 8th and Roast. 4 of them in the city. You can get their beans everywhere as well. And Nick, where can people find you, follow you, get your work, and pay for good journalism?
They can find me somewhere in Nashville, and I'm usually on the street. Twitter at Nick Suss. I don't tweet nearly as much as most people, so if you like that, follow me.
That's just healthy right there.
Yeah.
Go to Tennessean.com. You can obviously read a lot of stuff for free. Subscribe if you want to pay for it. I've got a newsletter, Talking Titans, that you can find. I don't know if a lot of people know about that one, but I try to keep things lighter in there, keep things a little bit more funny, if you guys think I'm funny at all. And beyond that, we're going to have a lot of coverage from myself, from my colleague Gentry, who will be getting back from Paris sometime soon, and from all of us here at the Tennessean. So if you guys like quality coverage of the Tennessee Titans, go ahead and give me a try.
More fun. Practice field near the Cumberland River or Paris, France?
Oh, gosh, the Seine and the Cumberland. Let's compare and contrast, shall we?
Different varying levels of E. coli.
Let's not and say we did. Nick, thank you so much for hanging out and giving us some time. We do appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, happy to help.